In the middle of the 14th century, people went to bed healthy and woke up dying. There was no warning, no gradual decline, no time to prepare. A fever would strike suddenly, stealing strength within hours. Dark, painful swellings appeared under the arms and along the neck, growing larger by the day. Breathing became labored, pain became unbearable, and within days, sometimes within a single night, entire families were gone. Church bells rang so often that cities eventually stopped counting the dead. Graveyards overflowed, bodies were stacked in the open. Streets that once echoed with voices fell completely silent. Across Europe, from villages to great capitals, a single terrifying question spread faster than the disease itself. Was this the end of the world? What no one understood at the time was that they were living through the deadliest pandemic in recorded human history, a catastrophe so vast that it would kill up to half of Europe's population and permanently reshape the course of civilization. This was the Black Death, and once it began, there was no escape. If this already feels overwhelming, stay with this story, because the true scale of what followed only becomes clearer with time. To understand how deeply Europe fell, we must first understand how high it stood. The early 14th century was not an age of decay and ignorance, as it is often imagined. It was the height of the High Middle Ages, a period of confidence, expansion, and connection. For generations, Europe had enjoyed relative stability. Thanks to a climatic phase known as the medieval warm period, harvests were plentiful, famine had retreated, the population had nearly doubled in just 2 centuries. Cities burst beyond their ancient Roman walls, swelling with life and opportunity. Paris, Florence, Venice, and London were crowded, noisy, vibrant centers of trade and culture. Towering Gothic cathedrals rose over these cities, not just as religious monuments, but as symbols of technological mastery and spiritual confidence. Society felt ordered, purposeful, and protected. Most people believed the world made sense, governed by divine logic and human hierarchy. And more importantly, the world was connected. A merchant in Venice could trade in silk that had traveled across the entirety of Asia without ever leaving established commercial networks secured by the Mongol Empire. This vast system of routes, sometimes called the medieval World Wide Web, moved spices, gold, ideas, and technologies across continents with unprecedented speed. It was a bustling, optimistic world that believed it was moving forward. But this interconnectedness carried a hidden cost. The same roads and sea lanes that delivered prosperity were about to deliver something far more lethal. The infrastructure for global catastrophe already existed. All it lacked was a trigger. That trigger originated thousands of miles away from Europe's stone streets, in the windswept steppes of Central Asia, likely somewhere near modern-day Kyrgyzstan or northern China. This was a land of extremes, endless grasslands, brutal winters, scorching summers. Here lived an ancient biological presence that had existed quietly for millennia, a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It lived among burrowing rodents, marmots, and ground squirrels, maintained in a fragile ecological balance far from dense human settlements. For centuries, the bacterium remained largely contained, but in the 1330s, that balance collapsed. Climate historians point to a period of ecological disruption, possibly drought followed by heavy rains, that devastated rodent food sources. Driven by hunger, infected animals migrated closer to human communities. Their fleas came with them, and with that movement, the boundary between wilderness disease and human civilization dissolved. The devastation of the Black Death did not simply vanish once the initial wave passed. It lingered like a shadow over every facet of life. Villages that had once thrived were left as ghost towns, their stone cottages slowly crumbling, roofs caving in, and fields overtaken by wild grass and brambles. Shepherds and farmers were gone, and with them, the intricate knowledge of crop rotations, irrigation techniques, and animal husbandry vanished as well. As a result, Europe faced not just the loss of human life, but the collapse of practical knowledge that had sustained communities for generations. Those who survived wandered through landscapes that seemed more hostile than before, filled with the eerie silence of abandoned homes and the distant howls of wolves reclaiming land that had been human for centuries. If you're finding this shocking, don't forget to like this video so we can continue uncovering stories that history almost erased. In the cities, the aftermath was equally grim. Where once bustling markets had offered color, sound, and trade, there were now empty stalls, cobblestone streets littered with refuse, and the lingering stench of decay. Entire guilds and crafts had vanished, leaving skilled labor in short supply. Stonemasons, blacksmiths, and even candle makers were gone, creating a vacuum in society's ability to function. This labor shortage had profound consequences. Surviving workers suddenly found themselves in high demand, able to demand wages and conditions previously unimaginable under the rigid feudal systems. Lords and merchants, desperate to maintain the flow of goods and agricultural output, often had no choice but to concede to demands. It was a rare moment in history when ordinary peasants held real power, yet it came at a cost. The psychological scars of seeing entire families, friends, and neighbors die were omnipresent. Make sure to comment below if you can imagine living through that kind of terror. Religion, which had once been the backbone of medieval life, faced an existential crisis during the plague. The Church had long been seen as the guardian of both the spiritual and social order, but as priests, monks, and bishops succumbed to the disease, the trust of the populace began to erode. People flocked to cathedrals in desperate prayer, only to find them empty or filled with fellow sufferers coughing and crying in despair. The flagellant movement, once a fringe phenomenon, became widespread as thousands of men marched through towns whipping themselves to appease God. In some regions, whole communities participated in ritualistic penance, believing that only extreme devotion could halt the pestilence. Yet even these public displays of faith failed to save many lives, intensifying fear and suspicion among neighbors. In this climate, rumors and conspiracy theories flourished, as communities sought to assign blame to someone, anyone, beyond the invisible force of the plague itself. If you find the interplay between fear, religion, and society fascinating, share this video to let others see how humanity responds in extreme crises. The Jewish communities of Europe, unfortunately, bore the brunt of the blame. Despite papal edicts condemning violence against Jews, accusations of well poisoning and intentional contagion spread like wildfire. Cities such as Strasbourg, Mainz, and Cologne became sites of horrific massacres, leaving permanent scars on Europe's cultural and demographic landscape. Entire families were wiped out, and survivors were often forced to flee to more remote areas, only to be met with suspicion in new towns. The social fabric of Europe had been torn not just by death, but by fear-driven violence. What emerges from these events is a grim lesson about human behavior under extreme stress, one that resonates even in modern times. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated as we explore more critical lessons from history. The countryside, often romanticized as a haven from urban disease, proved equally vulnerable. Peasants who tried to flee cities carried the disease to villages, where densely packed cottages, poorly ventilated spaces, and contaminated water sources allowed it to spread rapidly. Entire manors were abandoned, leading to unharvested crops, starving animals, and a breakdown of local economies. Forests began to encroach on farmland as human management disappeared, changing the very ecology of the European landscape. Wolves and other predators expanded into these areas, creating a cycle of fear and uncertainty. Scholars today point out that the Black Death may have permanently altered Europe's natural landscape, with long-term effects on land use and wildlife populations. If you're intrigued by the intersection of human history and environmental change, hit the like button now. It helps more people discover this story. Even as the plague receded, waves of smaller outbreaks continued to haunt Europe for decades. Communities that had rebuilt were often devastated again, preventing full economic or social recovery. Trade slowed, markets faltered, and the psychological toll was staggering. Survivors lived with a constant awareness of death's proximity, influencing art, literature, and philosophy for generations. paintings, woodcuts, and plays increasingly depicted skeletons, decayed corpses, and the fragility of life. The danse macabre became a cultural touchstone, reminding the living that death was indiscriminate, touching kings, peasants, clergy, and merchants alike. These cultural shifts reflected the deep and permanent impact of the Black Death, showing that pandemics leave marks far beyond immediate mortality. Make sure to comment below which part of this story strikes you the most. We want to hear your thoughts. Economically, the labor shortage reshaped Europe's social order. Surviving peasants could demand wages, move to new areas, or leave feudal obligations behind. Serfdom, while not immediately abolished everywhere, began to crumble. Landowners faced a choice: accept higher wages and better treatment for workers, or see their lands lie fallow. In some regions, this led to social revolts as peasants pushed for permanent change. Historians often describe this period as the golden age of laborers, a brief but transformative era when the balance of power temporarily shifted. The Black Death, in essence, forced Europe to confront structural inequalities that had long been accepted. If you're following this story, subscribe. More fascinating historical shifts like this are coming. Internationally, the pandemic also disrupted trade routes, diplomatic ties, and military campaigns. The Mongol Empire's remnants, already fragile, suffered devastating population losses, weakening their control over Asia. Mediterranean trade slowed as ports struggled to manage incoming ships, creating shortages of essential goods. The ripple effects were felt as far as the Middle East, North Africa, and even distant regions like Greenland. In a sense, the Black Death was the first pandemic to have global consequences, showing how interconnected human societies were, even in the 14th century. If you're fascinated by early globalization and its vulnerabilities, share this video. Let others see the hidden history of the world. Psychologically, Europe's collective trauma left lasting scars. People's perceptions of life, death, and faith were altered permanently. Art, literature, and folklore began reflecting themes of mortality, decay, and divine punishment. Societies became more suspicious and cautious, forming proto-public health measures such as quarantines, lazarettos, and sanitation protocols. Cities like Venice pioneered these strategies, forcing ships to wait 40 days in isolation, the origin of the word quarantine itself. These measures, though primitive, laid the groundwork for modern epidemiology and public health. If you find this fascinating, like and comment below on how you think societies can learn from past pandemics. Education and scholarship also suffered. Universities, previously centers of learning and innovation, saw professors and students die in large numbers. Libraries lost manuscripts, and scientific inquiry slowed as surviving intellectuals focused on immediate survival. Yet, paradoxically, the Black Death indirectly stimulated new ideas. The breakdown of old systems forced societies to innovate, leading to improvements in agriculture, commerce, medicine, and governance. In the long term, Europe emerged more resilient and adaptive, setting the stage for the Renaissance and the modern age. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll explore how crises like this shape the future of civilizations.